The song that appears at the beginning of this video is an overclocked remix song of Ori and the Blind Forest, done by Daniel Carlton and a number of supporters. Check out Overclock Remix if you'd like to download that song. It's free. Might be worth a listen. Hello, Vernacular Faithful. Redcoat here. This morning, I woke up and I was thinking about something else. Well, I'm always thinking about something in the morning, it appears. This is probably going to be just kind of a regular thing. But this morning I was thinking about particularly a talk I had with someone while I was, walking about and making connections. I was at a party specifically, and this guy was in the real estate space. And one of the things that was of interest, and it was something I was aware of because I have also worked in specifically construction as an electrician. So I was privy to elements of the space. One of the things he mentioned was that because of how expensive things are getting in the housing market, it's really hard to make a profit. And I got to thinking, well, maybe there's an answer here. And I know this is vernacular games, so you're thinking, wait, how does this connect to video games? Well, in this case, it isn't necessarily utilizing an example to influence how we approach games, but rather looking at an example that's set forth in the game space and using that to influence how we approach a different thing. So, let me get into it. You see, when you're doing housing projects or projects where you have to build stuff, one of the things that comes along is that you've got a number of expenses that you have to deal with. So the first is the materials, acquiring the materials. And that has gotten way more expensive as of recent, and because most of our materials are actually imported. And this comes back to a previous video that I'd mentioned where we've been selling out America and the fact that we don't do things here. Now I think we're starting to get better about that, but it's still a thing. Most of our materials, at least the ones that people get on the regular, are imported things, so there's going to be some extra cost on top of that. But along with that, you also have the land itself. And as any investor knows, land rarely, if ever, goes down in value. You actually have to do something to the land to make it go down in value. And this comes back to the fact that it's a limited resource. General rule of thumb, if you have a resource that is fairly limited, the value will go up over time rather than down. It is only if the resource degrades over time that it might lose value. But even then, if it is rare, the fact that it degrades over time puts some time pressure on it, and that might even make it more expensive. But I digress. The point is that the land is extra expensive, and the materials are extra expensive, and then on top of all of that, the workforce is extra expensive, and this comes down to the fact that the cost of living in the Americas has gone up by a lot, and that's due to inflation. And so if you want people to stick around and work with you, you have to, or at least you are supposed to, pay them a living wage. Now, we've seen a number of corporations and other things find ways to skirt around that. I think to Walmart or VMC, one of the worst contractors that I've ever worked for, where they will pay you just enough that you feel like you're being paid money, but you're not paid enough to be recognized as fully employed. which means you can go on unemployment while you're still working at a place like Walmart or VMC. And the thing is, they know this. They do this on purpose. They even suggest it to you. It's like, no, you're not making enough money? Well, that's okay. You still count for unemployment. You're under the income amount. So just do that. You'll be fine. But I digress. So we've got 3 problems here. So what do you do about that? Well, I can't answer to all of these things, but like I said, there's a company in the video game space that I think may be worth looking at. That is Nintendo. Now, I am a bit of a Nintendo fan myself. I loved their games, I loved their consoles, and I loved their general modus operandi. So, Nintendo in general has always been, in a sense, one of the first movers in the electronic space. And by that I mean they tend to do things that define the next shift, or at the very least, when they make something, it's got a unique twist to it. It isn't just a theme and a variation. So if you think back to the NES, when compared to the other machines at the time, the Atari and, well, I'm going to say the Atari because that's the one that my dad owned and that's the one I recognize, but there were a number of other items at the time. The NES was a very different console. Like, they had a different format for how their games actually worked, and it was utilizing a particular methodology of construction, which was not going for the most cutting edge stuff, but rather utilizing already explored technology in a different way that would allow it to be cheaper. And if you look across the board, Nintendo's strategy has always been thus: undercut the market by utilizing materials that are cheaper and utilizing proven methodologies for their architecture. They're less about being bleeding edge and more about providing a product that the average user can purchase and use. I guess you could say that their commitment is to making an entertaining product and getting it out to as many people as possible. After all, they're a toy company, so they follow a similar modus operandi, which is that the items, like toys in particular, they're made of plastic, which is a relatively cheap item. And they add value to the plastic by making it colorful and attaching it to a story and, exciting the imagination. And so you have this thing that wouldn't necessarily be all that useful, but you put it out on the store shelves, and there's a whole other thing with regards to how Nintendo handles stuff and why I have always considered them to be a toy company first and a game company second. And when you think about it, a video game console is a toy in its own way. But I digress. That's a talk for another time. The main thing of note is that Nintendo has always been an innovator in their space, and they always attempt to, when they build their consoles, they attempt to do it with the cheapest methods possible. But it goes beyond that. So one of the things with the structure of Nintendo's resource management, how they get the materials to make their things, because they can, if they need to, make their items in-house. Now, they do a lot of exporting and importing, and they have out-of-house workers, out-of-house groups that they subcontract with, that they create subcontracts with, I should say. But there's another part to this where they actually own a portion of pretty much any material that they use. So they actually own a portion of certain mines located in Japan because they need the metals to build their stuff. they own certain lumber places because they need the wood for various things. They own certain pieces of certain plastic places because they need the plastic to build their stuff. They own a portion of the material sources, and they use that to buttress themselves so that when times are tough, they actually basically have a discounted place from which they can acquire their resources, but also it allows them to essentially never really have to stop pushing forward. I mean, they stop pushing forward at any given juncture. If they lose a relationship with an outside group, they're not completely left in the woods. And this is another thing. Nintendo tends to have a lot of forethought when you're looking at how they operate. It comes down to elements such as that they do have a rainy day fund that they work off of. When they make their consoles, they actually do turn a profit off of selling them, which is different from Sony and Xbox. And there's a reason why Xbox got out of the console game. And I'm actually... Well, I guess I'm not surprised that Sony hasn't gotten out of the console game, because their modus operandi is they want to own your room. They want to have Sony branded on everything in your entertainment space. And if they can get it branded on other things in there, good on them. So, of course, they want to own the entertainment space as well. Microsoft tried to ape them, as they do. As I explained previously, Microsoft's actual strategy is to look outside, see what everyone else is doing, pick what's good, and follow along. So when they went into the console space, they took the decision of going, well, Sony's doing that, and I think they're making money. Actually, their console space was losing money fairly commonly, but it was good PR. But Microsoft was like, well, they're doing that, so let's do that too. But they didn't quite understand the mechanics of exactly how that really works. But that's another thing entirely. Shooting themselves in the foot. Anyway, the thing about Nintendo was that they have access to their resources because they own portions of their suppliers. So, in the blue-collar workspace, specifically construction, this is a possibility in my mind, is get a portion of whoever it is supplies the materials. If you are already making enough money to actually invest in going out and buying a house and then flipping it, then it would follow that you would be able to invest in buying a portion of a supplier. So, and there's a number of different supplies that you need on the regular as a construction group. Like, you need your lumber, you need your screws, you need your metals, you need your lights. If you're an electrician, there's a ton of things that get manufactured that you don't make them yourself. You go out and you buy them, and then you install them. Like, an electrician in general is, other than the understanding of how electricity works and being able to calculate the maximum load that you can have in any particular home or any particular space, the main things that you do as an electrician is you install stuff. And you install stuff, or you push wire, or you lay the foundation for wire to be pushed. But I digress. There's a lot of materials involved in that, and those materials are generally imported. So what you do instead is you find someone that's already making this stuff, or somebody who's going to make this stuff, or is going to mine the stuff. So let's say you need copper. Electricians need copper. That's kind of our lifeblood. Our wires are made out of copper. Our wires in particular are made out of copper. We don't have copper we don't actually have a job. I mean, there's aluminum, of course, but aluminum has kind of been sunsetted for various reasons. You still find it in certain houses, but generally speaking, it's an insurance claim waiting to happen. I digress. You buy a portion of a copper mine. And if you can't find someone who is already mining the copper, you find someone who aspires to mine copper and fund that endeavor with the understanding that you're going to get first dibs on whatever they get, and you're going to get a discount. You add that into your contract. You do the same for your lumber. You find a group that does lumber on the regular, and you buy a portion of them with the understanding that you're going to get a discounted price on all of their stuff. Now, you could go a step further if you really want to get swifty and start your own lumber company, and then be the supplier to everyone else and be able to set your prices because you've got something that everyone else wants. So this would be a paradigm shift for sure, and you would have to be learning you'd be learning some new things, but one of the things that you would have at your advantage is that you understand the market you're working in. You understand what people want and what people need as a construction guy. And so you'd be able to say, okay, so we need this particular type of lumber because I know that this is the stuff that we want. All right, where's the forest that does this? Okay, so we're going to chop those trees. And we also need to be growing new forests that do that specific thing. And there's a whole thing about doing lumber work sustainably. It is possible, and in actuality, most groups that do lumber work actually do it sustainably because they need to keep their jobs. If they destroy all of the trees, they don't have jobs anymore, and that's not conducive to their work. But I digress. This would be the way to look at it. Instead of being the one who's taking the supplies and basically being the taker, you're being the giver. Once you're the giver, you have control. You have more control over what's happening. You have control over the prices you set. You have control over where you distribute. You have control over what you distribute. You have more of an ability to adapt. When you see things going away and you're like, well, I need these. Oh, wait, we make those. That would be my take on that. So that would help deal with the materials problem, which is definitely one of the bigger expenses in the space. Now, the land problem, frankly, there's not too much you can do there from a, how would I say, adapting space, other than, going hyper crazy and doing like they did in Japan and I think Dubai, a couple of other places, and making more land. But that requires some siting and understanding that wherever you're making that land, there's actually a demand for it, because if you make the land and nobody comes, you're like, well, why did I do that? But beyond that, there's also the understanding that if you are in a particular space where the land is getting more expensive because everyone is going there, you're going to have to take a risk and go somewhere else where no one is. Buy some land in the Midwest. Now, I'm a little bit biased because I did spend a decent amount of time out there, but between Nebraska, Oklahoma, Kansas, and pretty much the rest over there, there's a lot of land that's cheap and easily acquired. Also, you're in the middle of the United States, which basically means you have not necessarily minimized your distance from everything, but you don't have an extreme amount of distance to go to get to any particular part of the United States. So it's a good hub for perhaps storing your supplies. And particularly Kansas, if I remember correctly, by their governing statutes. I tried to start my game company. Well, I tried to move my game company there for a brief period, and I'm still considering it for some reasons. But one of the things there is their methodologies for what they want. It's kind of old school. What they wanted, what they were built towards was industry. So they would give tax breaks to people who wanted to build factories and manufacturing out there. And they haven't really adapted since then. Well, I say that, but part of the reason I was looking at doing my video game company there was because they do want a piece of the tech pie. They just don't know how to attract it. I was actually working with one of their representatives on the tech initiative, and they were offering me tax breaks left and right to move my company out there. And if I actually had a very sustainable source of income, I would have taken them up on it, even with the fact that Kansas does have an income tax, which, if the legislators of Kansas are listening, you should get rid of that. Trust me, you'll get more business that way. Anyway, I digress. They had a lot of different programs for helping people out, and they really, really wanted to attract a tech presence out there. So, I mean, if you're looking for a cheap place to get started and a place where the government is actually just, they're frothing at the mouth to have you come, well, you might look out there. And if you want to go someplace where there's already kind of an infrastructure that's been growing, there's a couple of cities in Nebraska that have actually started to become tech hubs. They're lesser known, but that's good for you. That means you get to be one of the first movers in the area. That means you get to develop your personal brand recognition in that area and be the person that other people go to for help. In essence, just like with that idea of becoming a partial owner or becoming straight up a supplier, you become the one that people go to. You become the reason that people go to a space. Either they go to you for the jobs, or they go to you for the expertise or the materials or something else. But yeah, dealing with the land issue, at the end of the day, the main thing is stop going where everyone else is going. That's what's driving up the prices. You need to go where people aren't going. And then you need to understand, okay, what's going to draw people out there to get my sales. Now, for instance, I think to Junction City, that was the city that I briefly was in for a while. And that one's like right outside of a place called Fort Riley. So there's a military population out there. And it's fairly common that people who land there, some of them will live on base, but a lot of them will actually live in Junction City. And so there's a perceived demand for housing. And that was something that they were doing, was they were building a lot of new housing in the area. And because it's Kansas, the land was very cheap. Now, I had my compunctions with the way that they were actually expanding because, for instance, there was an old high school there that was at what I would call a commercial hub. It was right near a strip of food places and a movie theater and a couple of other things. But they decided to move it out to the far outskirts of the city, which is like, I mean, unless your plan is to expand city out far enough that that's actually in the middle of a space, like near a service space, it doesn't quite make sense. Like, you don't build the school and and then wait for people to come. You build the school to service the people that are already there. You meet the demand. A school isn't the type of thing where if you build it, they will come. It's if they want it, then you build it kind of thing. But I digress. I went off on a tangent there. The thing was that there's a modus operandi here, and I think Nintendo is a very good company to emulate when you're looking at doing business, particularly, and I've just, related it to the blue-collar space and just how that space works. The general idea being, don't just be kind of on the surface level of your supplies. Actually be involved in it so that you're actually making money off of that, or at least you're saving money in that way. So that would be my take on the thing. Is like, look for a group that's already making lumber, or look for a group that's already doing mining, or look for a group that you see that they're good at what they do and you know that they can do it, and invest in them starting the business of doing mining. When I talked about earlier the idea that we've been selling out America and that question of why don't we do things here, one of the reasons why I asked that question is just, if we do things here, we make it cheaper and we bring money to us because people are buying from us rather than us being professional consumers, which is in general what the United States has become. We're professional consumers. Even when we make things, we don't actually make the core materials. We buy the materials and consume that, which means that we're, at that part of the market where they can tell us what the price is, what the supply is, and whether or not we get it. That's giving up a certain amount of control that I don't like that we've given up that control. And I know from that whole video of the men who sold the world, the answer, of course, is it's cheaper. Well, I say, sure, in the short term, it's cheaper. In the long term, you lose all of your power, and eventually you will be routed by the amount of money that you're spending, because the people on the outside don't really have an incentive to give you a good price. And that's to say nothing of whether or not their national intentions are actually towards your betterment, which I'm not going to necessarily go any further into that, but let's just say that China's never been our friend. I think we all know that. But I digress. I think that's all I've got to say today, actually. I was going to say something else, but I think we're good. So, I'm going to bring it to the sign-off. This is Red Code of Vernacular Games. You can find us on vernaculargames.com, on Instagram, on Facebook, and on YouTube, Rumble, BitChute, and Minds. And LinkedIn. I think I said LinkedIn. I'm not sure if I said that one. We have a couple of projects that are in the works. None of them are quite at the point where they can be announced, save for we are working on a remake of Highway to the Moon, which was our first game, and you can find that first game on Steam. And also, there is a card game that is in the works, I am calling it Overclocked. It's a unique take on the collectible card game idea. I think it's something that's a little more affordable a little more affordable than you might expect a collectible card game to be. That's the whole idea. Is people spend way too much money on TCGs, like hundreds of dollars just to build a 60 card deck, and that's maybe lowballing it if we're not talking about legacy play. And I'm thinking there's a better way. So that's overclocked. Overclocked is a better way, at least in my opinion. Now, the rule set, the initial rule set, is available on Drive-Thru RPG, and you can download that and pay what you want for it. It's free. And you can read through them and see what you think. Eventually, I'll be recording a Let's Play of it, okay, this is how the game works. I just need to get my materials together and, well, frankly, I just need to commit to doing it. At any rate, there's that. And other than that, play the games you want to play, boyos. This is Redcone, signing off.